Happy day, I am Sree Keerthi, faculty from the Department of Communication and Media Studies. In today's video, you will understand in detail about the battle of Indian press against strong repressive laws and regulations that was brought by the British government. Now we must understand that newspapers came to India as one of the benefits of the British rule. Among so many positive components that we received from the British government, the luxury of reading a newspaper today is one among them. Now, it was James Augustus Hickey who brought the first newspaper to India called the Bengal Gazette in 1780. So, from that period, most of the newspapers, it was controlled by the Englishmen, that is the Britishers. Even though that was the scenario, the East India Company really did not like the idea of a free press. Now, what does that mean? They really did not like somebody criticizing what they did, their actions, their government, etc. Now, why was that? Now back then, journalism or the news content that people received was not really structured. We did not get sports section, international, national as such. It was basically scandals, gossips, etc. that took over the paper. Now this was exactly why the East India Company did not like the idea of a free press. So every official of the East India Company, that is from the Governor General to the least important official of the East India Company, was very hostile and unfriendly towards the press. So they wanted to curb the independence, they wanted to restrict press in every possible manner. Now how do they do that? Now we must understand that there was no legal restrictions as such initially, okay. So they used certain weapons like pre-censorship, imposition of libel or deportation, etc. to curb the editors. Now deportation was the effective medium that East India Company used against editors to control their freedom. Now what is pre-censorship? Pre-censorship is basically the act of restricting something in advance of what should be published. Now for example, let's say I have a paper A and I am the editor of the paper. Now if I have to publish the paper, I will have to submit the entire paper before the government. The government will inspect the paper and the government will have the power to remove any article or any parts that they feel might disturb the public order or that will bring down their reputation among the public. So Britishers used this option. Next was libel. Now libel is basically written or printed defamatory content. Now what is defamatory content? Defamatory content refers to any false statements that will be published or that will be written, that will be spoken about an individual that can bring down the reputation of a person. Now defamation is of two types. One is libel and the next one is slander. So back then it was just newspapers, right? So they used libel to impose on editors who were very notorious, who troubled the East India Company to a great extent. And the third one was deportation. Deportation was forcing someone to leave the country. Now why did they do that and how did they do that? Now as I was telling you, the Englishmen controlled the press, right? So this means the editors were from England. So when the East India Company really did not like any particular editor, they forced him to leave back to his own country because he was not from India, he was from England, right? So this was one way in which East India Company exercised their power over press. So some of the most important editors like James Augustus Hickey, James Silk Buckingham, all of them were deported back to their country because of these kind of press regulations, right? Now why was there a need for legal restrictions? Now we must understand the power of press started to grow over a period of time. Its strength started to increase, right? So many Indians started to own newspapers and East India Company was not able to deport Anglo-Indian editors or they were called as half-castes back then, right? Because they were not from England, they were from India. So they were not able to deport all of them. So the Supreme Court in Calcutta and the Privy Council in London came up with the idea of bringing in legal restrictions to curb the independence of the press to a great extent. Now it was in 1799 the Marquis of Wellesley brought in the Censorship of Press Act. Now this person was not a friend of the press, okay. So he wanted to curb the independence of the press to a great extent. So he brought in the Censorship of the Press Act in 1799. Now what did this act state? The act stated that every printer of a newspaper was required to print his name at the bottom of the paper. Every editor and proprietor of a newspaper should notify his name and address to the secretary to the government. No newspapers to be published on Sundays and no newspaper to be published unless inspected by the secretary to the government. Penalty would be immediate deportation. Now we must understand that before every newspaper, every printing press started their publication, they'll have to submit a copy to the secretary to the government and he will inspect the entire paper and he had the power to remove certain articles, remove certain parts that he felt might disturb the public order or might bring down the reputation of the government among the public. So this was one of the stringent laws that was brought down to bring down the independence of the press. Next came in the Licensing Regulations Act of 1823. Now this ordinance was brought by John Adams. Now John Adams, he increased the stringency level of the previous laws, right. So he brought in the system of regulations or system of licensing. Now what does this mean? Licensing means that every newspaper, every journal, pamphlet in any language will have to obtain a license from the Governor General, which should be signed by the Secretary. So if you see, it laid down that every newspaper, journal, pamphlet or printed matter in any language should obtain a license from the Governor General signed by the Chief Secretary before publication, right. So this system of licensing, increased the tension among the press, because already there were so many laws that was bringing down their independence, and bringing in a license disturbed the editors even more, and the government also had the power to revoke the license. So imagine how difficult that should have been to the editors, right. So failure to obtain a license would mean penalties. Now penalties was not just deportation but also paying heavy fine amounts, right. So the next act was the Metcalfe 1835 Act. Now to a change in the scenario, Metcalfe was a friend to the press. He was a liberator to the Indian press because he believed in a very sympathetic and a more liberal approach to the Indian press. So when he came in, he revoked the Adams regulations of 1823 and he simply came up with an act called as Press Act of 1835. So when he revoked the Adams regulations, people fondly called him the liberator of the Indian press. Now what did his act state? So printers and publishers were required to provide detailed information about their place of publication. That was it. So it was basically, you just come, give me where your address is, so where your place of publication is, and then you can proceed with your publication. So he had a very liberal approach to the press regulations. So in this particular period, the press did grow to a great extent. So number of papers started to flourish. Then came in the Press Act of 1857. Now the year 1857 is very important in the history of Indian independence era, because it was during 1857 the Great Revolt or the first war of independence broke out. Remember, it was a time when the greased cartridge caused the war. The sentiments of Hindus, Muslims was deeply shaken and people were very angry, and it was reflected in the Indian press. The tone of the press was quite unbearable, okay. So it was very provocative in nature. What they wrote, what they published angered the East India Company to a great extent, because they felt that the friendship or the kinship that they had between the people and the government started to decline. So Lord Canning, the Governor General, introduced the Act of 1857, the Press Act of 1857, and it reintroduced the John Adams regulations, that is the system of licensing. So printing presses were required to obtain a license before they can publish. Next came in the Press and Registrations of Books Act 1867. Now this act sought to regulate the printing press by bringing in a system of registration. So before you wanted to keep or own a printing press, you will come forward, disclose your details by registration. Okay, but after you register, you will give in all your details, right? Who is the editor, who is the proprietor, you will know where your printing press is, what you are doing, etc. So by doing this, they were able to maintain a system of tracking. So in case the newspaper violated any particular law, they were able to go back and understand who the editor was, find who the editor was, and punish him accordingly. And according to this act, they were also required to keep copies or preserve copies of their newspapers or books, etc. Next came in the Vernacular Press Act of 1878. One of the cruelest acts of all time. So this act was brought specifically to restrict the Indian language owned newspapers, right. So at that particular time, all the Indian owned language papers was heavily shaken, because government gave them the power to issue search warrants without no particular cause, invade any printing press and take actions, especially without going to the court. So imagine the number of newspapers that would have closed back then, right. And the government also had the power to arrest the editors and proprietors under the name of sedition. The Hindu once wrote that no Indian can never remember Lord Lytton without a curse. So this was the amount of frustrations the editors had back then against Lord Lytton. Next came in the Press Act of 1910. Now this act can be seen as a continuation of the Press and Registrations of Books Act, because when the printing press came forward to register, they had to pay a deposit amount of not more than 2,000 rupees and not less than 500 rupees. Now the government clearly made use of this amount by forfeiting it whenever required, that is whenever the newspaper or the publication violated any particular law, this amount was fortified. So which means it was considered null, and if you had to continue publications, if you wanted to continue publications, you had to pay another security deposit amount for you to proceed. Now, we discussed in detail about some of the repressive laws that British government brought about, right? You must understand that during the later years, that is even after we got independence, the situation was the same. Nehru, who was the first prime minister, who himself was a journalist, really did not like the idea of a free press. Now, when he came in, he also brought in censorship, he brought in laws to restrict the press in every possible manner. The situation grew worse when Indira Gandhi came to power. Nobody can forget the darkest chapter, the emergency during 1975. The Indian press was completely broken, right? So, I would like to conclude by telling that a free press is important for the development of the social and the political development of a society. Journalism is a watchdog of the society. It reflects whatever is happening in your society. So, if you begin to restrict it, you will have your own repercussions. So, let me know if you like the video and share your opinion on press laws or the independence of press and how important it is to the development of the society. We will meet again with another interesting video. Thank you.